UFC walkout photo. On October 18, 2025, a UFC Fight Night match between Brendan Allen and Ranier de Ridder in Vancouver went viral across the internet, but not because of the fight itself. Instead, the moment that caught everyone's attention happened during Brendan's walkout. A small handful of people noticed that as he was making his way to the octagon, a fan flashed his phone to the camera for a split second, showing what looked like a very disturbing image. What a lot of people thought was the picture of a lifeless body lying on the ground. What made this already creepy incident even more disturbing was when the camera moved a bit further and showed the person who was holding the phone. He was wearing a luchador-inspired wrestling mask, likely to hide his identity, all while looking directly at the camera with an unsettling, almost psychotic smile on his face. Which begs the question, what was this picture, and why did he show it on live TV to an audience of millions? Reverse image searching the picture on the phone doesn't bring up any similar results, and no one has been able to link it to some movie or TV show either. In other words, the person holding the phone likely took the picture themselves. And judging from what it looks like, the most disturbing explanation that comes to mind is that the man in the luchador mask had killed the person in the photo. The person appeared to have heavy bruises, including black eyes and possibly a bloody mouth. Even if they were alive, they appeared to be in serious danger, possibly after being kidnapped by the perpetrator. And while this might sound absurd at first, it's definitely a real possibility to consider. There have been countless killers throughout history who craved attention and deliberately left behind clues to become famous. Maybe this particular killer thought showing off their crime on TV was the best way to receive that attention. And with the virality and discussion online, he certainly achieved that goal. On a similar note, this could also be a ransom kidnapping situation where the stunt was meant to publicly prove the victim was still alive to their family, especially since sending the photo directly would risk law enforcement tracing it back to the kidnappers. That said, there are a few notable innocent theories suggesting the opposite that have likely kept law enforcement from conducting any real investigation. Some have suggested that this was nothing more than a prank. As a user on Reddit speculated, "To me, it looks like some college-aged guy laying on a bathroom floor with makeup on. Could be a dude who got so drunk his mates decided to mess with him by drawing on his face or putting makeup on him, then took a picture. One of them decided to shame him even further by flashing it at the UFC when he knew the cameras would be broadcasting." It's also possible that it could be a deliberate attempt to create a creepy hoax, especially since it happened fairly close to Halloween. Cropping out just the phone and brightening up the image also makes it look a bit more like a regular photo. Some argue that now it looks like a man simply sunbathing on an outdoor lounge chair with a pool in the background. But why would someone be motivated to show something like this if it really was an innocent picture? At the end of the day, all of these theories are just guesses, and any number of things could really be going on here, innocent or disturbing. Because the masked man's identity was never revealed, we will likely never know for sure. Buried alive in Brazil. In January 2018, a 37-year-old Brazilian woman named Rosângela Almeida was going about her day when she suddenly collapsed out of nowhere. She was rushed to the hospital where doctors found that she had experienced 2 cardiac arrests. She was in critical condition and eventually passed away on January 28 after barely clinging to life for a few days in the ICU. Her family held a memorial service for her that evening, and she was buried in the Sonora Santana Cemetery near her hometown. Her remains were placed in a wooden casket which was encased in a solid concrete tomb. Losing her at such a young age was devastating for her family, and especially her mother. What none of them knew, however, was that their grief was about to take a dark, tragic turn. You see, a day after her burial, reportedly, people living next to the cemetery started hearing noises from graves. These included the sound of someone banging their hands against a hard surface, as well as a faint scream in some instances. However, the neighbors initially brushed off the noises as a prank by children, something that apparently happened often enough for them to ignore the noises entirely. But several days passed and the sounds did not stop. It wasn't until 11 days later that someone realized that the sounds were coming directly from Rosângela's grave. The neighbors immediately alerted her family upon making this discovery, fearing that she might have been falsely declared deceased and was still alive when buried. What made the situation situation even more concerning was the fact that Rosangela had been suffering from fainting spells ever since she was little. The time she spent unconscious had also been increasing over the years. Maybe she was just passed out when the hospital staff incorrectly declared her dead. Family, friends, and neighbors rushed to the cemetery and opened her coffin, hoping to save her, with some people recording the whole event. Sadly, Rosangela was showing no signs of life. However, the people who touched her body exclaimed that she was still a bit warm to the touch, implying that she was at least alive up until very recently. Later reports also claimed that the nails in the coffin were looser than they were when she was buried, and that there were injuries on her wrists and blood marks on the inside of the coffin that weren't present before. Even the pieces of cotton placed in her nose and ears were knocked out. Most importantly, witnesses reported that she didn't seem nearly decomposed enough for someone who had died 11 days earlier. After the casket was exhumed, Rosangela was taken back to a nearby hospital where she was pronounced dead for a second time and buried once again. The question everyone had on their mind, however, was whether she was buried alive the first time. Her family, and particularly her mother, believed that was the case. Testimony from other people also seemed to back this conclusion, with one neighbor stating, "There were more than 500 people who came here and packed the cemetery. Everybody went to see, lots of people touched her foot, and everybody saw that she was still warm. She wasn't cold." Now, there are countless real stories of people tragically getting buried alive by accident, with many eventually passing away in the coffins before they could be rescued. And while the vast majority of these stories are from before we had modern medical tech, errors still do happen to this day. Just a few years ago, a Chinese woman was declared dead and sent to the funeral home before being discovered to be still alive. So the idea of the same thing happening to Rosangela was a real possibility, especially when we consider the fainting spells she experienced her whole life. However, despite all the reports and supposed evidence, both the doctors and investigators stayed adamant that she had passed away before her burial. In a statement to the media, the doctor explained that she was already in a serious, irreversible condition when she arrived at the hospital. From there, she was put under an intense level of monitoring to observe all her vitals closely. So there was no way he could have falsely assumed her to be dead under those conditions. As for the slower decomposition, that was explained by the result of her being on strong antibiotics while she was in the hospital. But these explanations failed to convince Rosangela's mother, who was devastated by the thought of her daughter enduring days of suffering buried in her casket. The case also became major news across Brazil, with many been accusing the police of not doing a proper investigation to protect the hospital and the doctors. So, what really happened? Was Rosangela actually buried alive? From everything I was able to find, it's not likely. For instance, many people reported her body being warm to the touch after opening the casket, suggesting she was alive up until recently. However, even if we assume that she was buried alive, there's no way she would have had enough air in the tomb to stay alive for 11 days straight. Giving it the benefit of the doubt, let's assume there was a hole somewhere in the tomb big enough to let fresh air in. Even then, it's near impossible for her to stay alive without water for long, all while screaming and banging on the coffin. Speaking of which, the investigators also claimed that they didn't find anyone who personally heard the noises, implying that it was nothing more than a rumor. That said, the details surrounding the case, like the reports of wrist injuries and blood marks, are still a bit murky to reach a solid conclusion. Whether or not Rosangela was actually buried alive is still, and will likely remain, unknown. The Wikipedia edit. WWE wrestler Chris Benoit was scheduled for a live house show on Saturday, June 23, 2007 in Texas. But hours before the event, the 40-year-old wrestler called management and claimed that he wouldn't be able to make it because both his wife and son were ill with food poisoning. But he didn't show up the next day and wasn't picking up his phone either. After over 24 hours of trying to contact him, the WWE management dialed 911 and requested a wellness check for Chris on Monday, June 25, assuming that maybe he was sick as well and needed help. However, nothing could have prepared the officers that were dispatched to his home for the tragedy they were about to witness. They arrived at his house in Georgia at around 2:30 p.m. and rang the bell. When no one answered, they looked for a way inside and discovered the garage door was wide open. The whole house was eerily silent. the reason for which became apparent when they discovered the remains of Chris, his wife, and his son scattered throughout the house. And as it turned out, the person responsible for this tragedy was Chris himself. He ended the lives of both his wife and son before turning on himself. The question now was why? Why would Chris do such a thing? But before the investigators could answer that question, they received a tip that challenged everything they thought they knew about this case. They were contacted by a Wikipedia representative who claimed that someone had made a suspicious edit to the Chris Benoit Wikipedia page at 12:01 a.m. over 14 hours before police did the welfare check. The edit read, "Chris Benoit was replaced by Johnny Nitro for the ECW Championship match at Vengeance, as Benoit was not there due to personal issues stemming from the death of his wife Nancy." The thing about Wikipedia is that it's a social collaboration platform where anyone can add new info or make edits. One possible explanation was that Chris, for some reason, made this edit himself. However, the autopsy report revealed that Chris had actually ended everything by Sunday evening, many hours before the edit. So, how did someone learn about what had happened before the news broke out? The possibilities were endless. Maybe he had a second accomplice, or maybe he told someone about what he had done earlier. Tracing his phone revealed that he had sent 5 cryptic messages to 2 of his colleagues, Chavo Guerrero Jr. and Scott Armstrong, including one message that he sent 4 times, reading, "My physical address is 130 Green Meadow Lane, Fayetteville, Georgia." And the second one that read, "The dogs are in the enclosed pool area, garage side door is open." These were sent just before 4 a.m. on Sunday, after he had already taken the lives of his wife and son. However, despite their unsettling nature, investigators didn't find any connection between what Chris did and the colleagues he sent these messages to. As for why he did it, the autopsy report also revealed that Chris had CTE, which is a progressive brain disease linked to repeated head impacts. His brain resembled that of an 85-year-old with dementia. Put simply, he likely experienced an extreme mental breakdown which resulted in an irreversible tragedy. However, while this reveal explained most of what happened, the Wikipedia edit was still a mystery. This mystery deepened further when investigators managed to trace the IP address that was used to make the edit and discovered that it was from Stamford, Connecticut, the location of the WWE headquarters. This, combined with the text messages, reignited rumors that WWE management might have been involved in what happened. But before the case could move in that direction, investigators found the man who made the edit, a 19-year-old university student named Matthew Greenberg. Matthew, however, was surprisingly cooperative. He allowed the police to confiscate his computer and other devices to investigate and agreed to an interrogation without any resistance. And when asked about his edit, he claimed that he made it after seeing rumors of it on wrestling forums.
Well, over last weekend, the wrestler Benoit, there was rumors going on because he missed the pay-per-view and his scheduled dates, which he never does. And I was reading rumors and speculation online.
Where online?
On forums. I forgot the exact sites. But I was
okay, hold on. On forums?
Yeah.
Okay. In any chat rooms?
No, not chat rooms. I was just reading about it, and some rumors came up, and I just.
Yeah, what were the rumors?
That his family was sick, or someone maybe died, like his wife perhaps, because he missed the pay-per-view.
Okay.
He was apparently telling the truth, as investigators didn't find a link between him and Chris. Wikipedia admins also found several other false edits he had made over the years, suggesting he was just an internet troll who guessed the truth by pure coincidence. Or at least that's the official story. Some believe that Matthew either had something to do with the incident or at least had insider information, especially since he wasn't the only one who made a similar edit. Something I haven't mentioned yet is that there was a second similar edit just 1 hour after Matthews was removed, stating that Chris missed his show because of the passing of Benoit's wife, Nancy. The IP for this edit was traced to Sydney, Australia, but the person who made it was never identified. For some, this is the confirmation that what everyone knows about Chris isn't the whole story and there was something else going on below the surface. On the other hand, the existence of this second edit could be used to prove Matthews' innocence, as they suggest the rumors were genuinely circulating on wrestling forums since two seemingly unrelated people attempted the same change. That said, it's been more than 18 years since this incident, so even if there was something deeper behind it, at this point it's unlikely to be revealed. Sunset Cruise. The final days of May 2023 were meant to be a celebration for 18-year-old Cameron Robbins, a recent high school graduate from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He was on a celebratory cruise in the Bahamas with several hundred fellow graduates. The festivities, however, took a devastating turn on the evening of May 24th, leading to a mystery that the internet is still debating to this day. At around 9:30 p.m., Cameron was aboard the small cruise ship named the Blackbeard's Revenge near the uninhabited Athol Island, northwest of Nassau. The ship was stocked with alcohol, and since the legal drinking age in the Bahamas is 18, Cameron and his friends were drinking non-stop. But as they were enjoying their time on the cruise, someone reportedly dared Cameron to take a leap off the ship into the dark water. Cameron, likely due to heavy intoxication, agreed to the dare instantly and jumped overboard, resulting in one of his friends recording this video using Snapchat.
Yo! This kid jumped off! Oh my God! Oh, bye-bye! Oh, that... Grab the buoy! Hey, the buoy!
This was, unfortunately, the last time anyone saw Cameron alive. The cruise stopped as quickly as it could, and the crew alerted the Coast Guard about Cameron's disappearance. However, despite an extensive 2-day-long search of a 325 square mile area, Cameron was nowhere to be found. He more than likely passed away not long after jumping overboard. But even his remains were never discovered, which, considering the extensive search, was very odd. And the reason for it, according to some, is that he was attacked by a shark shortly after his jump. This theory began when someone noticed what looked like a large fish swimming toward Cameron seconds after he landed in the water. Moments later, Cameron could also be seen swimming in the opposite direction while ignoring the life preserver right in front of him, almost as if he saw the shark and was trying to get away from it. That said, the evidence supporting this theory is a bit inconsistent. On the one hand, the shark population in the Bahamas is quite healthy. These cruise ships often throw food waste overboard as well, likely causing the local marine life to associate them with food. So it's possible that a shark was following the ship and immediately swam over to Cameron to investigate as soon as it heard him hit the water. Additionally, many sharks also hunt at night, making shark attacks on humans much more likely. However, while this shows that a shark attack was a possibility, it doesn't outright prove it, especially when the evidence indicating the opposite is just as strong. For starters, the phone video that started this theory is extremely low resolution and blurry. What people interpret as a shark could very well be just a wave reflecting the ship's light. Cameron swimming away from the life preserver can also be explained by him being intoxicated and getting disoriented after hitting the water. Most importantly, while the Bahamas has plenty of sharks, their numbers around Athol Island specifically are extremely low, making the chances of Cameron being attacked by one even lower. A more straightforward explanation for Cameron's disappearance is the combined effect of exhaustion and environmental factors. Even in the warm climate of the Bahamas, prolonged exposure to water at night can quickly lead to hypothermia. The average sea temperature around the Bahamas in late May is certainly survivable for a short time, but the physical stress of jumping from a significant height, coupled with the immediate panic and exertion of swimming in the dark, open sea, would rapidly diminish a person's physical and mental capacity. Cameron was also seen swimming initially, but his direction appeared erratic. Even a strong swimmer can quickly become disoriented and exhausted when facing strong currents, and the immediate onset of psychological terror of being alone in the vast ocean darkness. Not to mention the fact that Cameron was highly intoxicated, turning the already difficult task of surviving in those waters into a near impossibility. And while the definitive cause of Cameron's death, whether by exhaustion, hypothermia, a shark encounter, or a drowning accident remains unknown, what is clear is the tragedy of a young life cut short so abruptly, with the incident serving as a stark reminder of the inherent danger of the open sea, particularly at night. The Mad Gasser of Mattoon. On the night of September 1st, 1944, a woman in the small town of Mattoon, Illinois named Aline Carney woke up smelling a sickening sweet odor in her bedroom at around 11 p.m. She dismissed the odor at first, thinking it was just the scent of flowers drifting in from outside her open window, but the sweetness soon became suffocatingly intense. She tried to get out of bed to investigate but collapsed to the floor as soon as she stood up. That's when she realized she had no feeling in her arms or legs. The odor was also starting to cause a burning sensation on her lips and throat, making it difficult to even breathe. Seconds later, she also heard her daughter crying on the bed, asking why she couldn't move her arms or legs. Hearing this, Aline used all the strength she had to call for help, eventually getting the attention of her sister, who was sleeping in a different room. Her sister noticed the smell as well and determined that it was coming from the open bedroom window. She ran out to call the neighbors for help. Around the same time, Aline's husband, who was a taxi driver, pulled into the driveway, but before he could get out of his car, he was horrified to see a thin, tall figure standing outside the bedroom window. It was dressed in all black with what looked like a gas mask on its face and was holding a strange tubular device in its hand. The husband tried to chase after it, but the figure disappeared into a nearby alleyway. Given what they knew, the family concluded that the sweet-smelling gas had been released into the bedroom by the mysterious figure, later dubbed the Mad Gasser of Mattoon by the local media. Aline and her daughter were able to recover without any permanent damage to their bodies. However, the attack on their home became the template for numerous similar incidents over the next 2 weeks. Victims, mostly women and often home alone or with family, would report being hit with an odorless gas or sometimes a sickly sweet smell. This was followed by a range of symptoms like nausea, vomiting, temporary paralysis, dizziness, disorientation, and a burning sensation in the throat or eyes. In some cases, the symptoms lasted for hours, requiring medical attention. Yet, despite the severity of these chemical attacks, any attempts to investigate the gasser came up empty. There was no visible damage to homes, no broken windows, and no fingerprints. The mysterious assailant seemed to vanish into thin air. Witnesses and victims reported seeing shadows or figures lurking outside their windows, specifically near the ventilation openings of their homes, but the police never found any evidence of it. The sheer volume of attacks, with at least 29 officially reported incidents in a very short span, combined with the inability of law enforcement to find any evidence, created an atmosphere of absolute terror. It reached a point where some citizens took it upon themselves to patrol the streets with firearms. People were sleeping in shifts, guarding their homes and neighbors. However, no matter how much people tried, a perpetrator was never identified or captured, leaving the Mad Gasser of Mattoon as an eerie, unsolved mystery. But it's worth asking whether these attacks by a chemical assailant were even real, or was the entire phenomenon an unprecedented wave of mass hysteria? The argument for it being a real assailant rests almost entirely on the initial medical findings and specifically of the reported symptoms. In the first few cases, doctors and police were genuinely convinced that a real chemical agent had been deployed. The victim's symptoms like paralysis, nausea, and the burning sensation were too consistent and too severe to be immediately dismissed as simple panic. On the other hand, the argument for this being a case of mass hysteria is incredibly compelling. It's also the theory favored by many criminologists and psychologists who have reviewed the case since. As the theory goes, while it's possible that the few initial incidents might have involved a real criminal, the vast majority of the 29 reported attacks were likely the result of psychological contagion. The terror of a mysterious, invisible attacker, amplified by continuous sensational newspaper coverage, made people hypersensitive to any strange smell or discomfort. Many of the reported symptoms, for example, like headaches, nausea, anxiety, and difficulty breathing, are also symptoms of acute anxiety or hyperventilation, a common reaction to extreme fear. Police searches also attributed the chemical odors found to common household cleaners, furnace gas leaks, or industrial pollution that was a regular part of life near Mattoon's industrial plants. A major breakthrough for the hysteria theory came when the Mattoon police publicly stated that the attacks weren't real and were likely caused by the community's war anxiety around World War II at the time and a collective nervous breakdown. And to everyone's surprise, the Mad Gasser of Mattoon attacks stopped almost immediately after the police released this statement. Ultimately, the case is left suspended between a real chemical criminal and a genuine mass panic. There is a possibility that the story began with 1 or 2 initial genuine attacks using a non-lethal irritant, which then acted as the trigger for a widespread case of what is medically known as mass psychogenic illness, where symptoms and fear spread rapidly throughout a community without an identifiable physical cause. But at this point, we will likely never know. Needs $700,000.